In the last section, we nearly wrapped up the API module. Just a little bit more, and then we'll be able to finish this app up. Looking at index.ios.js, we haven't yet imported the API module. So let's do that now. At the very top, we'll add var API require, and we got to give the path to it from the root directory. So we'll go into source and then get API. So we'll start at the root directory, go into source, and then API. Then we'll add a call to the API module inside of onRegionChangeComplete. We're making the call to the API here because this is the function that gets triggered whenever the user stops dragging, which is when we want to go and fetch the weather. In addition, this is the spot where we definitely know the accurate weather provided by, or excuse me, the accurate longitude and latitude provided by this region object right here. So we'll call API region dot, and let's make sure that we get the order of these correct. I'm going to go over to API, and it expects latitude and then longitude. So we'll do region dot latitude, region dot longitude. Okay, so all done, right? Not quite. It's rarely that easy. That's what I've noticed anyways. We're missing one step here. We need to get the data from the promise in API, the data right here, back into our component somehow. All we're doing right here is we're just making the API call. We're saying, hey, please go, reach out over the internet, grab the weather data for me, but then we don't really kind of make use of that data in any fashion. So to get the data back in here, we're going to use a little trick with the promise to make sure that we get the API data back. I'm going to flip over to api.js, and I'm going to go to the fetch line right here. And whenever someone calls this function, we're going to make sure that we return the promise as well. We're going to return the promise here. That means that back in index.ios.js, we can add on another then, and this then, which will be ran after both of these thens, because it's being chained on third, we'll get that data object that we just computed in the second one. One thing to keep in mind here is that we have a function keyword here. And if you recall, back maybe 2 apps ago, or in one of the very earlier sections that we were working on, I mentioned that there was one difference between the fat arrow and the function keyword that we have right here. And the difference there is actually pretty straightforward. We didn't go into it at the time, but it's a very useful difference. And that difference is the value of this, like this, within the function here. Whenever we use the function keyword, the value of this will basically be equal to don't know, right? If we pass the function keyword, a function using the function keyword to a promise, the value of this is just something that we don't know. The function is executed in some mystery context, and unless we use bind, like so, or some other method, the value of this isn't going to be what we expect it to be. And we definitely want to use this inside of this function here. So what we're going to do is we're going to instead use a fat arrow function in place of the function keyword. When we do this, the value of this, we'll say out here, this is really the component. That's probably a little bit more clear, which is what we want. Whenever we use the fat arrow function, the value of this is equal to this outside of the function as well. So inside of here, this is going to be equal to the component, which is exactly what we want, exactly what we need. All right, so with that in mind here, we now have access to our data. We have the correct this scope inside of our then callback here, our then function. So all we have to do now is somehow get our view to re-render using this data. Hopefully I want to try to get you to the state where whenever someone says re-render the view or update the view or change the view or anything having to do with updating or changing the view, you want to be thinking in your head of state. This is another great location to be using state. Remember, whenever we call set state, that causes our component to update or to re-render, and that's exactly what we want here. So we're going to add city, temperature, and description onto state as well. First, we're going to default their values inside of get initial state. We'll say city is an empty string, temperature is an empty string, and description is an empty string. So these are nice, safe default values for these three variables. Then, back inside of the then down here, whenever we get this data object back, all we have to do is call this .setState and pass it data. Now you might be thinking yourself, hold up here, data only contains the city, temperature, and description. It doesn't have anything to do with pin. Won't pin get like somehow overwritten or destroyed? Well, fortunately, that's not the case. SetState is always an additive operation. It always adds to SetState. It never destroys state. So even though we're passing in a whole object here with its own set of properties, it doesn't replace the existing state, it just adds to it. And what that means is that the pin, and we set right here, will not get overwritten. It will just be added to, that's all. Okay, so before we get too far into the weeds, we've gone like 2 or 3 sections here without actually running any of our code. So we're gonna do a quick sanity check by just adding a console log, and we'll just log the data back. Make sure that our request is set up correctly, all that kind of stuff. No syntax errors, all that good stuff. So I'm going to open up my Chrome debugger. It's here, we're good to go. And then I'm going to refresh the simulator. And you can see that we immediately get a console log here with our city, temperature, and description. I can drag around a little bit and we get our city, temperature, description. Another call popped up. So this is looking good. The only problem is that our city here is undefined. So let's do a little bit of troubleshooting here. If we go over to API.js, we'll see that the city property is pulling that city from json.city. Let's go look at our docs really quick. And over here you'll see that the city is in fact not city but name. So we just have an incorrect property name there. Totally my mistake. I'm going to change that to json.name. Let's refresh the simulator. And we now have Blake, Kansas, or Chipota. Blake is, whenever you refresh the map, Blake ends up being at the very center of the map. So you will almost always see Blake here as the default location, which is kind of a funny name to be the default because it sounds so similar to like blank. You kind of immediately think, wow, I must have done something wrong. But no, it's just Blake, not blank. Anyways, you'll notice that as we drag the map around, we're really close to Parsons right here, and our city is reflected as Parsons. That's good. Let's go up to Independence. Let's do Independence. So I'm going to drag over to Independence. That right there. Okay, so we're in Montgomery County. There we go. Independence. So it looks like our city is working correctly here. And the temperature, 84 degrees. Yeah, sounds pretty reasonable for the Midwest. Temperature sounds about right, and it looks like there's some light rain there as well. Cool. All right, so if you refresh the simulator and you did not have any luck getting this this data on here, probably 2 locations I highly recommend you check out. Over here in API.js, this root URL that we put together, it's kind of nasty. It's got the root URL, and then the query string starts right here. We put on our API key, and then we also throw on some additional properties down here. So if your request failed or you get some response that says something like, sorry, but you didn't include an API key, I highly recommend you double check the API key up here. Also double check the URL down here. Make sure that you've got all of the ampersands in between each of the properties that we added on. Finally, double check to make sure that you have lon here, L-O-N, instead of L-O-N-G. That's a mistake that I've made just many, many times. Because you really expect, longitude, L-O-N-G, I don't know. That's what I expect anyways. All right, so Looks like our app is correctly retrieving data. It's setting it on state right here. Fantastic. In the next section, let's make use of all this data that we're console logging and spice up our view a little bit.